Good evening from our Digging Deeper studio. The sun is out for now. My Christmas poinsettia is back for now. And I have two amazing people with me here for now. But we are going to be talking about our fourth week of Advent. To my left, I have Pastor Mark. To my right, I have Pastor Rod. And the question I am throwing to them today is, who was their role model as a kid? I'm excited for this one. Digging back just a few years. Mark, let's start with you. How you doing, and who was your role model?
Good. Yeah, I've noticed you got a cup of coffee here.
I do, yes.
Yep, afternoon kind of a pickup.
Yeah, a little afternoon pickup.
Little Oregon Ducks cup.
I love my Ducks.
They beat my Trojans, but that's another conversation.
Well, college football is just kind of a weird wash. I don't think anyone's getting too upset about any wins or losses.
Yep. Well, hey, so I had a leader in my youth group when I was in junior high. His name was Roger. And he was, I don't know, maybe like mid-20s, and he was awesome. Like, he would take us places, camping. We would go to ball games. So, I mean, he like poured into us. And so he was like, I mean, he was a great basketball player, motorcycle rider, you know, just all-around great guy. And I look back on those days. I mean, the Lord really used him in our lives. Okay. Totally. I have a special place in my heart for youth ministry because of him.
Wow. That's super awesome. Cheers for Roger. Mm-hmm. Rod, how you doing?
Good, brother.
All right. So we're just a few days from Christmas. How are you doing with all your Christmas shopping and everything?
You know, it's perfect for a guy because, you know, it used to be either Walmart or Target, but now it's Walmart, Target, or the whole world via Amazon. And you know, it's been great. I've been keeping up with my shopping.
Yeah. All right. If people ask how my shopping's doing, I say, ask Rachel, because she's been doing it all. But anyways, favorite role model growing up, who was it?
You know, probably my Uncle Jim O'Connor. He owned his own carpet cleaning business and ultimately became a multimillionaire. But it wasn't the wealth that he modeled for me, but hard work, optimism, courage, and just a cheerful approach to life. And that was with him till the day he died.
Wow, super cool. Kind of quick, throwing this one on you, a celebrity role model. Who is somebody in the famous person world that do you guys look up to anybody in the celebrity world?
Man.
You don't have to have an answer, but I'm curious.
I don't know. I mean, I think... who's that? His name escapes me. Derek Carr.
Oh, yeah.
Las Vegas Raiders. That sounds funny. Las Vegas
still
Raiders.
Weird to say.
Derek Carr loves the Lord. Great example. What would it be like to be someone who loves Jesus on the Raiders?
Yeah, in Vegas.
Yeah, like he preaches and stuff in his church, and he's just a full-on legitimate. So he's one of my. One of mine.
Very cool. Yeah. I think I've stopped having celebrity heroes a long time ago, but if I could choose a life to live as a celebrity, probably would have been Harrison Ford with all the cool movies he was in and just kind of his personality.
Okay. Yeah. I like that. All right, well, let's get into it. We have, as if you've been following us, we like to start our Digging Deeper with kind of a Christmas-oriented question. This will be the last week because our next Digging Deeper will be after Christmas. So I'm going to send this one to you, Rod. And I've kind of always wondered, I'm surprised I've never sought the answer for myself. Xmas. People say, you know, you see it written a lot. Probably people don't say it a lot, but Merry Xmas. So I want to talk about the origin of that. Where did that come from? And then do you see that and even something like Happy Holidays as a knock towards the Merry Christmas that is pretty heavily emphasized in the church?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of back and forth with that. You know, some people say, oh, you're trying to take the Christ out of Christmas and you're secularizing the whole thing. And without a doubt, there are some people who are happy to write Xmas or say Xmas rather than Christmas for that very reason.
Because they're not even going to think about the word Christ. Like they don't
or happy to avoid saying Christ. But its origins come from Christos, which is the Greek word for Messiah, and Kai, which is basically the first letter of Christos in Greek, is like an X. And so that was the origin of it. And it's been used by Christians since the 16th century. So valid origins for it. When I knew you were going to ask me that question, I printed out this Christmas card from 1910 that says, "I bring you a Merry Xmas."
Oh, wow,
my.
Okay.
1910. That's
Whoa.
going back a few years.
So
Dang.
that's been around. I guess the question is, should we use Xmas today? You know, the New York Times style guide says, no, don't, write it out, if you're going to write it. And so New York Times is a very liberal organization, but they're saying, if you're going to bother writing Christmas, might as well do the whole thing. That's kind of my perspective on it. You're saving 4 letters in writing, saved a lot of time there. So, yeah, I would say generally just do Christmas instead of Xmas, but there's nothing evil or wrong about it.
Okay. You have any thoughts on that, Mark? Or?
I mean, I might abbreviate just myself for my own. It's kind of like, shorthand kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But I agree with Rod. I mean, I think it's potentially offensive, so why do it?
Yeah.
Even though I love the origins, it's totally legitimate origins, the actual Greek, letter for Christ. And then, the whole holidays thing, I'm always quick, to remind people holidays comes from, it means holy days, right? So, again, not that everybody knows that, and it could be, again, kind of potentially offensive to people that are really, I think in a good way, trying to keep Christ in Christmas, which I think we'd all agree is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But, happy holy days is maybe a good way of just referring to it.
It makes me laugh and think about the whole BC, AD, BCE thing, in that, people don't want to say before Christ. And so we're like, well, before the common era. Then. Yeah. Oh, fine. When was the common era begin? Well, that was at the birth of Jesus, And so you couldn't get around it like you can't get around the holidays thing,
Yeah.
So.
People trying to avoid Christmas is just a big old gotcha. Like, it's all right. You're just going deeper to some root origins. So,
yeah.
All right. Yeah. And I think kind of, if I'm not mistaken, Nat talked about this 2 weeks ago with the Christmas tree and cookies. It's a hard thing. Like, you can be a Christian or a non-Christian and say Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, but it's kind of, where's your heart at? If you're trying to be malicious, like some of those people, then okay, you're malicious. But if you're just trying to wish somebody a happy holiday, then there's nothing wrong with that. So ultimately, I think it comes down to the heart issue, as Nat had said a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So one more kind of question before we get into the song that we're talking about, the Song of Zechariah. I threw this one to both of you, and I think there's some fun answers there. But what is the biggest misconception about the nativity story? Now, for those of you that are listening, I'm sure you have a few nativity scenes somewhere throughout your house. You got Jesus in a manger, probably a donkey, a sheep. You got the parents there. But what would somebody, the most common listener, be surprised about if we were to actually have been there in the nativity scene when Jesus was born?
Man, there are so many, actually. and when I was a senior pastor at a church, I would talk about some of these, and people would be upset at me for exploding their understanding of Christmas. And so I've been a little more quiet about it. But since this is digging deeper and we're going deeper, then
they have my email, not yours.
You guys can handle it.
That's right. So probably wasn't December 25th. Shepherds aren't out on the field watching their flocks in the middle of winter normally. The census isn't going to be taken in the middle of winter either. So, yeah, probably fall or spring is when Jesus was born, not in the depth of winter. No star hovering over the house or place where Jesus was born, at least not on that night. Remember, the angels told the shepherds, and this will be a sign unto you. They didn't say, go check out where the star is hovering. They said, you'll find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, laying in a manger.
Right, that was actually what the the Magi were told to look for. And
Right.
They likely got there later, right?
Right.
We
And
don't
so
know.
that's, when I grew up, my mom always had a creche or a manger scene, right? And, you have baby Jesus and Mary and Joseph, but then you have the donkey and the goat and the cow kind of thing. But then you have the shepherds, and then you also have the Magi. And of course, there's three of them, which we don't know. There's three.
Right.
And really, they were probably miles or hundreds of miles away at that time. They weren't there. So they really don't belong in that manger scene, nor does the star above. But,
Right.
But
Hallmark gets a few extra bucks out of that, so you got to have it.
That's awesome.
I just want to know where the drummer boy fits into. I don't see him in a lot of nativity scenes, and he has a song about him.
I saw a YouTube of David Bowie and Bing Crosby singing Little Drummer Boy together, which was quite amazing, but I had no idea those two would ever be combined as a song.
Yeah, it seems like the wise men. There's a whole bunch of stuff just with that whole crew that we just don't know. Like three, unlikely. We
Gold,
get three.
frankincense, and myrrh. Right?
We get three from the gifts. There was actually probably an entourage.
Yeah.
Right.
Calling them kings. It's very unlikely they were kings. They were more likely, astronomers, astrologers, star experts, and even king makers. They were the group that kind of put the kings into power, and they were almost like a religious priest that we learn about in their day. So those are things that we don't really that we don't necessarily see in our story here today. Mary on a donkey.
Yeah.
That would have been something for the wealthy.
Wow.
And so we know that they weren't very well off, and so it's very unlikely that she was on a donkey. Probably had to walk. So I don't know. I mean, that was something to consider.
Yeah, there were some really interesting things about even when Joseph and Mary brought Jesus to the temple for dedication, that, he was circumcised after 8 days, but probably, from Leviticus, the laws that Mary had to go through a 40-day purification time. And then there's laws for how you were to offer a blood sacrifice of a lamb, and if you couldn't do a lamb, you did the birds, right? And we know from Luke that they did birds, so it meant they couldn't afford the more expensive offering of a lamb. So here's the thing: that means the Magi probably didn't show up for those first 40 days because they brought gold, right? And and we know that they were supposed to return to Jerusalem to tell Herod about when they found the baby. And, of course, they never returned. And then Herod had all those under 2 slaughtered. Well, it doesn't mean that they came after 2 years. Herod may have just been covering his bases, right? But sometime between 40 days and 2 years is when the Magi probably pitched up. And then Joseph and Mary probably used the gifts from the Magi to use to flee into Egypt.
Wow.
So kind of interesting stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Seems like there could be a good drama thriller about that, right? Them fleeing. I'd pay to watch it. But, well, let's get down to it. So, Mark, was it good being back on your home court, being downtown?
Yeah. I mean, I was able to be around over the last month because of Saturday night service, and sometimes coming in at 8:30 because I didn't have to be out till say 10 o'clock out at Murphy or whatever. But no, it was great to go to the other campuses, but it was really good to be back. And to be teaching right here. So
yeah,
enjoyed it.
Well, downtown got Mark's, I believe it was 6th, 7th, and 8th or 9th time teaching on Zechariah, but that's where we're at. So go ahead, although I'm guessing by now maybe some of you listeners have heard this message maybe more than once, but give us a little background. Who is Zechariah? And namely, who is he in relation to Mary?
Yeah.
And the question I've been asking for most of these songs is, why him? Why is he important?
Yeah, well, quickly, Zechariah was a Jewish priest. He's from the tribe of Abijah. So there were 24, actually from the division of Abijah, there were 24 different divisions and about 18,000 priests in Israel at that time. And so he's married to Elizabeth. She's also from, she's a descendant of Aaron as well. So they're both descendants of Aaron. And so they're kind of the opposite of what Tyler and Andy and you were talking about last week, where you have like Simeon and Anna and even Mary that you talked about a few weeks ago, who are more of the obscure, kind of the lower echelon, no credentials. But Zechariah and Elizabeth are really establishment.
Yeah.
They are high-powered, well-respected priests, or at least he's a priest. She's from the line of the priesthood. So we don't know for sure what the relationship was between Elizabeth and Mary. Zechariah wasn't related to Mary, but his wife Elizabeth was a relative of Mary, likely a cousin, distant cousin, whatever. Obviously, the age difference between Elizabeth and Mary is significant, and so they're not like sisters or in that regard. So, I think he represents Zechariah represents the opposite of everything that was messed up in the priesthood at that time, because Jesus had his strongest words to the religious establishment. It was kind of like he's the drain the swamp guy in Jerusalem. But Zechariah and Elizabeth stand out, according to the text, as righteous, blameless in the ways of the Lord. And so he truly loved the Lord.
Awesome. So where we've been asking, why Mary, why them, it actually makes sense on paper maybe why a guy like Zechariah would be involved in this story. Like you said, he's an established person. So.
Well, right, and he's also, at whatever age he was, well over 60, he's a great candidate for the glory of God to work through, and for he and his wife to finally have a child. So that you can never count God out. Like he always sort of, or often I should say, does things in a way that gives him glory and really kind of blows our mind and how he does that.
Right. Anything to add to that, Rod?
It's interesting. I mean, I wonder, without doubting anything that you said, Mark, and I found that very fascinating, I do wonder what kind of guy Zechariah was.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question.
And, it all, for me, goes back to how he questioned Gabriel.
Mm-hmm.
Because who gets to question the archangel of God,
Right.
And he's probably there shining and, putting off a glow because he's saying, don't be afraid. And then he tells him, yeah, you're going to have a son. And he's like, how can I be sure of this? And it's like, really? That's what you're going to do? You're going to say, how can I be sure of this to the archangel? And he got what was coming for him, He's like, okay, you don't get to talk for the next 6 months or whatever it was, 9 months. And so I wonder, honestly, if Zechariah hadn't become a little grumpy and embittered over time about his childlessness, just as we get older anyway, we get a little more, we got the aches and the pains, and we feel like we can call people on the carpet. Who cares? I'm older now. I get to. So I wonder if he had a bit of that attitude, and he's giving it to Gabriel, and Gabriel's like, then that you don't get to do that with the archangel, So
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, I want to roll right into that because we actually got a Digging Deeper email from a very faithful listener. Thanks, Mom. Comparing that instance, because it kind of happens with Mary as well. So Zechariah is an aged gentleman, and he questions Gabriel like, okay, I don't quite get this. And Mary does the same thing. And I get her circumstances a little bit more. She's like, whoa, how am I going to have a baby? And so she questions the angels. Now she gets what seems to be a nice, gentle response, some assurance, where Zechariah gets blasted. And so we were kind of talking about this right before. Explain why that happened, why they both didn't get the same response.
So with Mary, she was told she's going to have the baby, and she said, "How will this be since I am a virgin?" And
The math isn't working out here. I don't
right. And so for me, she's like, "I believe you. I just don't get it, God, you know?" And I think that's fine to say, "God, I don't understand. Help me understand." Versus, "I'm not sure I trust you, God, in your promise." And so those to me are very significant differences. And I think that's a good devotional carryover for us, is that we get to question God and say, "I don't get it, God. Why'd you let this little child die or get hurt, or why did you let this happen?" We get to ask those questions. What puts us in a dangerous territory is when we start saying, "Not sure I trust you, God," because then that's the basis of our faith, is trusting him for our salvation, trusting him for our forgiveness and eternal life. And, that's the gift from God. So we can ask God how or why, but we can't trust his own trust, or we can't question his own trustworthiness.
Okay.
That's really good, Rod. I was thinking of another issue, perhaps. Mary's questioning, to me, is much more legitimate because nobody had ever heard of a virgin birth before.
Right.
But Zechariah had precedent biblically for God coming through with a couple who was infertile, especially in this case, an older couple beyond childbearing years. So you could argue Zechariah is held more accountable because, there's biblical precedent for what the angel is saying.
Right.
Whereas with Mary, that had never happened before. Right. So I think, along with that, the only other thing I think I would add to that is that you could say with Zechariah, he should have known better, not because of what was recorded in the history of Israel in the Old Testament, but he should have known better because he had a higher expectation as a priest, as somebody who had handled the word and had served the Lord for so many years. Not that Mary is off the hook because she's young or a teenager, but she is. I mean, she's very young and well versed in the scriptures, as we learned from her song a couple weeks ago. But yeah, I mean, Zechariah, he there's a higher bar for him, and he should have known better. And I would agree with Rod. There appears to be more doubt in Zechariah's mind than in Mary's, which is interesting. So maybe there was sort of that, kind of getting up there in years, and if we're not careful, I know that temptation. It's like you start to get a little more jaded, cynical.
Like if it hasn't happened now, why is it going to happen?
Yeah. Well, and Zechariah had been waiting a long time, and a lot of prayers just hitting the ceiling. Right?
Yeah.
Messiah, nothing. Temple service, he prayed to offer the incense in the temple, nothing. A child for himself, nothing. And by the way, those three prayers got answered in the same basic day, the same week, really, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to go back. You mentioned his temple service and just a little bit of context. So I think it's verses 8 through 10, and then I believe 23 he mentions he's coming out. What was that week of service that he was serving? Is that something all the priests are doing?
Yeah, we don't know for sure if it was 2 1-week periods in the year when the division. So let me back up a second.
Right.
Each division of the priesthood, there's 24 of them. So picture about 1,000 priests in each division. They were responsible for the temple duties in Jerusalem for 2 weeks out of the year, whether it was 2 weeks back to back or whether it's 2 separate weeks. I don't know that we're totally sure on that. And they would be responsible for all the stuff that was happening in the temple, which, it's a lot. Sacrifices, offerings, the lighting of incense, the singing, teaching, benediction, lots of stuff going on there.
Yeah.
And I mean, even you think about where do they get the oil for all the lamps? That had to be pressed, olives, and so all that stuff had to happen. And so each of these divisions, this is Zechariah's week or 2 weeks of service. They're in the temple, and then then there would be kind of a pass off on Sabbath midday. They would pass off to the next group that was coming in, sort of like other professions today. A buddy of mine's a fireman, and like when he gets off his shift, he was telling me that they kind of pass off to the new shift. There's a little bit of time. You got to talk about what's gone on, and that happens in other professions as well. So that's kind of what's going on there with this temple service. Priests had other duties throughout the nation of Israel where they lived throughout the year. You know, they would work in the synagogue, and they would do a lot of teaching, and they would do, prayers and all kinds of different. Sometimes they were even kind of a quasi-medical group to inspect like diseases. Remember Jesus during the leprosy, go to the priest and get signed off that you've been cleansed, and so a lot of community kind of activity that happened through the priests. All right, anything to add to that, Rod? That was a very
interesting,
very thorough. Yeah, no, that's really cool. I think that just helps us kind of get more of a picture of what's going on, a little bit more life behind these characters.
I think it's hard to understand. I mean, people really do rely on the church today, which is good because we are the body of Christ. But in that day, everything came through the priest.
Yeah,
God's covenants, his dispensing his grace came through the priesthood, and actually the presence of God, like in the temple. It's hard for us to understand that.
Yeah, temple takes a week off. Things are going to be pretty weird in the city. Like, it's just, way different. Way different time. Well, as we've been doing, I do want to kind of actually look at this song, and if I have it correct, verses 68 through 79. And does it actually? I'm curious. Does it actually ever say that this was a song, or is this him just praising? Or I guess it doesn't really matter, but. I think it was a praise, so we take it as a song of adoration.
Yeah, I was talking to Tyler about that, and he was reminding me that whenever you see poetry in the Bible, that you can call it a song.
Right.
Essentially, poetry, song. That's where songs come from, right? So this is definitely poetry.
Yeah.
In its structure, and that's how we can say that it
sure,
could be
but
a song.
The question is it like a musical movie, right? Or you're just talking along dialogue, and then all of a sudden,
do all the background characters freeze,
and
he stands on the table. That's what I want to see.
Music and stuff. Yeah.
Someone mentioned to me, who's a good musician. He said that song happens when words alone can't express what you're feeling. I thought that's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah,
that's good.
And I also think having been to a number of bar mitzvahs and stuff, where they will have the rabbi, or there's another name for it. I want to say Cantor, but that probably isn't the right one. Who will sing God's word, right? And they just kind of go up and down with the melody, and they're making it up as they go mostly. But you just wonder, well, maybe that's a tradition that goes back thousands of years, possibly. So
that sounds like Tim singing. Just kind of makes it up as he goes, right? No, actually, that's me. That's me.
I do. Oh man, I would love to serve in any aspect of the church, but the one area you will never see me is the worship ministry. So I'm going to go ahead and read this, and then the question for you listeners, the question I'm going to pose to the guys is, what is the motive behind this song? And we kind of see his aha moment here, but you guys behind the camera, I kind of want you guys to think about maybe what you see, then we'll go ahead and answer that. But I'm going to go ahead and read these verses real quick. It says, "Praise the Lord," in verse 68, "God of Israel, because he has visited and redeemed his people. He has sent us a mighty Savior from the royal line of his servant David, just as he had promised through the holy prophets long ago." I'll keep reading as we get the lights back on. "Now we will be saved from our enemies and from all who hate us. He has been merciful to our ancestors by remembering his sacred covenant, the covenant he swore with an oath to our ancestor Abraham. We have been rescued from our enemies so we can serve God without fear, in holiness and righteousness for as long as we live. And you, my little son, will be called the prophet of the Most High, because you will prepare the way for the Lord." Verse 77, "You will tell his people how to find salvation through forgiveness of their sins. Because of God's tender mercy, the morning light from heaven is about to break upon us, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, and to guide us to the path of peace." So that's the song. And what I was talking about earlier, it seems like there is there's a motive behind a lot of the other songs that we went through. So the angels kind of seem to be an announcement or a praise. Mary's seem to be joy. Simeon's kind of seem to be relief. Now that's just my opinion. You guys might even disagree with those. But what would you say is the motive behind his song here, Mark? I'll send that one to you.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to just imagine his joy. Again, I mentioned earlier those 3 prayer requests that had been going unanswered for years. He's finally getting to do his temple service now that many priests never got to do. He is learning the Messiah is coming, and he's learning that he's going to have a kid. Oh, and by the way, his kid is connected with the Messiah.
Right.
He's actually the guy that the last 2 verses of Malachi talk about.
Yeah.
The
he's a big deal.
The Elijah figure who's going to come and be the forerunner and be the one to prepare the way for the Lord. So a lot of joy in his motive. But I think it breaks down pretty easily. In first half, like I said in my message, first half is praise. He's just praising God. The second half is he's giving prophecy about his son, or to his son, really.
Yeah. And after the run-in he kind of had with Gabriel, it's kind of nice to see on this back end, like there's that joy. I think it's good to kind of see it come around.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about this song is that, okay, he sees Messiah. There's definitely that physical warrior king aspect of the Messiah. He mentioned save or rescue from enemies a couple of times. And so there's that kind of in the line of David, kind of visualizing a better than David or a greater than David.
Like a political Messiah?
Yeah, sure. There's that political Messiah side of things. But there's also, he says you will tell his people how to find salvation through forgiveness of their sins. Okay, well, we're getting into spiritual territory, which is, past King David kind of thing, which is cool. He's seen something in the future, but he doesn't see it completely clearly. Save his people from their sins. Well, I think Zechariah would have been happy about that. Was happy, but would have been surprised to find out that the definition of his people included Gentiles from every ethne or people group in the world, and that this would ultimately mean the end of temple sacrifice. My job is going to come to an end. He didn't get any of that. He didn't see that. He just saw the Messiah. He's going to be great. It's going to be a great thing. But he didn't understand fully the implications of it. And, sometimes I just even wonder about ourselves. Hopefully my boss doesn't ding me for this. But, his people... maybe that definition, which was broader for Zechariah than he understood. In some ways, I hope it's going to be even broader than what I understand the definition of his people is, as those who have placed their trust in Jesus Christ. I mean, I get that. That's what we have in Scripture. I just think God's grace is so great that there may be a broader definition than what I think. I know there's the old joke about the Baptists dying and going to heaven, and everyone else is quiet, and he's like, "Why are they being quiet?" And they say, "Oh, well, they think that you think no one else is going to be here except the Baptists, right?" Okay. And so I think I'm hoping there will be more people in heaven than I actually know or trust will be there. Yeah. If that makes sense.
You want to ding him now, or you want us to turn off the camera?
I'm putting in my time card.
Well, interesting last week with you, Andy, and Tyler, and talking about like Simeon was so unique in that time because he was actually getting the picture of spiritual Messiah, and everybody else, the only thing they could see and get from the Old Testament was political Messiah. Like let's dominate Rome. Let's get back to the glory days of Israel. We want our Messiah here. And it seems like, of course, Simeon, he saw the real mission of Jesus, it seems like.
Yeah.
And it seems like Zechariah kind of sees it too, although it's hard to know exactly how much. I mean, look, even the disciples didn't fully get it, right? They were
Right.
expecting some political messiahship from their master that needed to be corrected
Right.
there later, and when they finally found out what was going on. But no, I think the simple message here, and I taught on that this weekend and for a couple of weeks, is God does redeem. He redeems His people. He's gonna buy you out of your bondage, especially spiritual bondage and slavery. And God remembers. In fact, that's what Zechariah name means. God remembers. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That's nice.
And then God renovates. He changes lives. I love the picture here of you're going to be rescued from your enemies, and you're going to be enabled to serve without fear. So that's like the Holy Spirit's work in our lives. So pretty cool song, and a great story of what God does through Zechariah and Elizabeth.
Yeah. And my last kind of question on Zechariah, especially with what we talked about with maybe how his personality was, and this could be a quick answer if you want, or you can unpack it. Do you think he was jealous at all that his son was essentially the Robin to Jesus's Batman, or do you think he was just so joyed that there was a son and he had a role in this whole Messiah thing? Do you think that was enough, or he was kind of like, dang it, why didn't we get the Messiah? And again, I think this is all just our thought.
Honestly, that question blew me away because I don't see how there could be any jealousy.
Well, of course, yeah.
I mean, like, I get to play any part, any role. Woohoo!
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
That it's hard
probably
for
a
me to
neither here
believe.
nor there question, and
Yeah.
it was written by the
Yeah.
only person here without a kid. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at, and I shared it earlier, you look at all the answered prayer that Zechariah is experiencing in this moment.
That's such a great point.
So he's like on cloud 19. You know what I mean?
Right.
And he knows it's not just his son's having a baby. It's not that he and his wife are having a baby. His son's not having a baby. This is the guy again. I mentioned it. The last two verses of the Old Testament are predicting him.
Yeah.
So his son's a big deal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like about as big as you can get without being the Messiah.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Big deal. Yeah. Then again, just kind of more of a fun way to end it. If there was jealousy, might not even be the right word, but I mean, it looks like it's a collective answer. Heck, no. There's probably no jealousy whatsoever.
Yeah.
Just pure joy and praise, because his
But
son
by
would have
the-
been fun to meet. I
But
think.
by the time John the Baptist is getting kicked around, Zechariah is likely, obviously, long gone.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, didn't have to see
Right.
what would eventually happen to
Yeah.
his son, who would have a fantastic ministry and people getting prepared for the Messiah, getting baptized. Thousands of people coming out to the Jordan area in droves to get baptized, and John the Baptist was an amazing preacher, and kind of a quirky guy.
Oh,
But-
yeah. No, it seems quirky. If it was a movie, it, like hit the ending, the tragic ending of his life kind of seems like the part in the movie where you're just kind of like, we got to pause it real quick. I have to process that. Like there was such a
Right.
really cool dude, probably your favorite character in the movie up to that point, and then just and
Right.
he's gone.
He's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of like, well,
his head's cut off
Yeah.
by a king here. What was that all about?
it wasn't even, he didn't even fall in the river or something. It was just
Yeah.
like a really mean lady went ahead and
Yeah.
Well, I don't think he would be someone that you would necessarily feel really comfortable around. I mean, he and maybe it's too much of a stretch, but you can perhaps see some personality similarities in Zechariah and John in willingness to confront. I mean, you're going to confront the archangel Gabriel. It's easy for John the Baptist to confront the Pharisees in a sense. So maybe there's some sort of genetic or cultural lineage there.
Okay.
I like the. There's a lot of takeaways here, a bunch of stuff I didn't have time to bring up.
Right.
But just the God's ask of Zechariah and Elizabeth in their old age to be doing what they're doing. Like you get up to my age, Rod's age. I'll speak for myself, my age, and you're kind of sometimes looking to slow it down a little bit, And I read something like this, and it's like, no, we're just getting started, because
Right.
not that I expect to have a kid, but this whole idea of, wow, they raised him, they trained him. Like John the Baptist, it says he was filled with the Spirit while he was, in his mother's womb, whatever that all means. But he still needed training. He needed to be disciplined. He needed all of that. And credit Elizabeth. And so I just want to share, all of us, semi-retired, feel like our best days for the Lord are behind us. That's just not true.
Yeah.
Our best days are ahead of us, no matter how old we might be.
Yeah, that's a good word.
I just got to share a story. A close friend of mine has struggled with his son being a meth addict, and his meth addict son unwisely decided to be with a woman, and they got pregnant and they had a kid. Now the mom and dad are both in prison for numerous years. And my 65-year-old friend and his wife have decided to adopt this
Wow.
1-year-old baby. And it's like, wow, 65, he'd be 82 or 83 when this kid graduates high school. And he says, yeah, Rod, I don't know if I've got the energy. I said, yeah, but what you've lost in energy, you've gained in wisdom. You know a few things at
Yeah.
65 that you didn't know at 25.
You can work a little smarter, not
yeah,
harder.
exactly.
That's a cool.
That's
well,
awesome.
Yeah, definitely praying for that friend.
Yeah.
Well, as we're wrapping up here, we're going to go to Keep Digging, and this is kind of our final Advent digging deeper. So a resource, whether it's on Zechariah and Elizabeth or the Advent story, a resource that you guys couldn't share in previous digging deepers. What do you guys have for me and for the listeners?
Well, one nugget of application and then a resource. We didn't even touch the idea of the burning of the incense.
Oh, right.
And how it's such a beautiful theme of prayer throughout the Bible. I guess Psalm 141 says, let my prayer be like the evening incense, like the sacrifice.
Yeah.
And then in Revelation kind of connects the dots that the incense that's burned there in heaven, along with the prayers of the saints, are an aroma, there in heaven, right? And so I'm blessed by that, and also, rebuked as far as like how is our prayer like incense, and how is our prayer causing heaven to smell? You know what I mean?
That's interesting.
So yeah, it's very interesting. The incense is a picture of the prayers of God's people, and the incense was never to go out. That's why it was morning and evening. It was to be perpetual. So it's like our prayer should just like pray without ceasing. That's kind of where that comes from. So anyway, that's just one thought. Resource, I'm just gonna say the Bible Project guys and their videos. They got a number of them. They got
really
a number
good.
of those animated videos on Advent and on Luke 1 and 2. Really solid.
Yeah, I think the Bible Project is a frequent flyer on the Keep Digging resource suggestion for a reason. So definitely go check that out. Rod, what do you have?
This is for people who truly want to dig deeper. A few years ago, I read a book called The Battle for Christmas, A Social and Cultural History of Our Most Cherished Holiday.
Whoa.
It's by Stephen Nissenbaum.
Okay.
And it's pretty interesting because there were times in the past when Christmas was really just a kind of a pagan-y thing to do, or there were so many just additions to the holiday that if you were a true Christian, you didn't celebrate because that was when all the bad things happened, and so that's kind of gone back and forth over the years, and just how we've layered up our traditions over the years. Christmas caroling was often rather a menacing thing. People would go around and they'd come into your place and you'd have to feed them, or else, it's almost like Halloween. You get your house egg kind of thing, and so anyway, I just found it really interesting, this background.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there you go. The title itself seems pretty heavy, but it sounds like a good read. a lot there. But thank you, gentlemen, for that. And listeners, as always, thank you for joining us. Next week's going to be a little different. We are not necessarily going to hang out on the message of this coming weekend too much, but I have a few guests, and we're going to do 2020 in review. We're going to look at some.
Great.
It's actually going to be a whole digging deeper long of resources, podcasts, books, songs, just our favorite of 2020. So
Awesome.
a memorable year, should be a good podcast. I got a good crew, got a couple of your kids on it with me next week. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. Always a joy.
Thank you,
Tim.
Tim.
Good job.
We'll see you here again soon. And listeners, until next time, catch you later.
Bye.